Ready? All right. So first of all, I need to make sure that while we're reading, airplanes need to be out because obviously I want to make sure you guys are listening to this and reading along, not listening to other stuff. When we do independent stuff, again, I don't mind AirPods or whatever. So if you want to listen to stuff while we're working on the independent work after we're done reading, that's totally cool. I do ask that you guys read along too. I know there's some people when they have their books, they have them open, but they're just like staring off into space. So try to kind of follow along. It'll just help you like retain the information a little bit better. But we are going to be reading chapter 4 today. Chapter 4 is going to take us, it's about a half an hour. After we're done reading chapter 4, though, we are going to, and also there's going to be no quizzes. I'm not doing a quiz on chapter 3. We did the allegory thing for chapter 3, so if you guys did that, you're good. And then for chapter 4, I'll just briefly talk about it at the end, but that's pretty much what we're doing is chapter 4, and then we're going to talk about the research for your 20% project. The research is going to be due 2 weeks from today, so you guys are going to have plenty of time to work on it, but I at least want to get you guys started on it so you guys can, again, get some of it knocked out today, start the actual like gathering of information, and then over the next couple of weeks, we'll finish that up. So I'll go over that after we're done reading. So if you guys want to turn to page 59 in your books, does anybody not have their book, or does everybody got it? Looks like everyone's got it. So, okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. Thank you.
Chapter 4, Painted Faces and Long Hair. The first rhythm that they became used to was the slow swing from dawn to quick dusk. They accepted the pleasures of morning, the bright sun, the whelming sea and sweet air, as a time when play was good and life so full that hope was not necessary and therefore forgotten. Toward noon, as the floods of light fell more nearly to the perpendicular, the stark colors of the morning were smoothed in pearl and opalescence, and the heat, as though the impending sun's height gave it momentum, became a glow that they ducked, running to the shade and lying there, perhaps even sleeping. Strange things happened at midday. The glittering sea rose up, moved apart in plains of blatant impossibility. The coral reef and the few stunted palms that clung to the more elevated parts would float up into the sky, would quiver, be plucked apart, run like raindrops on a wire, or be repeated as in an odd succession of mirrors. Sometimes land loomed where there was no land and flicked out like a bubble as the children watched. Piggy discounted all this learnedly as a mirage, and since no boy could reach even the reef or the stretch of water where the snapping sharks waited, they grew accustomed to these mysteries and ignored them, just as they ignored the miraculous throbbing stars. At midday, the illusions merged into the sky, and there the sun gazed down like an angry eye. Then, at the end of the afternoon, the mirage subsided, and the horizon became level and blue and clipped as the sun declined. That was another time of comparative coolness, but menaced by the coming of the dark. When the sun sank, darkness dropped on the island like an extinguisher, and soon the shelters were full of restlessness under the remote stars. Nevertheless, the Northern European tradition of work, play, and food right through the day made it possible for them to adjust themselves wholly to this new rhythm. The little one Percival had early crawled into a shelter and stayed there for 2 days, talking, singing, and crying, till they thought him batty and were faintly amused. Ever since then, he had been peaked, red-eyed, and miserable, a little one who played little and cried often. The smaller boys were known now by the generic title of little ones. The decrease in size from Ralph down was gradual, and though there was a dubious region inhabited by Simon and Robert and Maurice, nevertheless no one had any difficulty in recognizing Biggins at one end and little ones at the other. The undoubted little ones, those aged about 6, led a quite distinct and at the same time intense life of their own. They ate most of the day, picking fruit where they could reach it, and not particular about ripeness and quality. They were used now to stomach aches and a sort of chronic diarrhea. They suffered untold terrors in the dark and huddled together for comfort. Apart from food and sleep, they found time for play, aimless and trivial, in the white sand by the bright water. They cried for their mothers much less often than might have been expected. They were brown and filthily dirty. They obeyed the summons of the conch, partly because Ralph blew it, and he was big enough to be a link with the adult world of authority, and partly because they enjoyed the entertainment of the assemblies. But otherwise, they seldom bothered with the big uns, and their passionately emotional and corporate life was their own. They had built castles in the sand at the bottom of the little river. These castles were about 1 foot high and were decorated with shells, withered flowers, and interesting stones. Round the castles was a complex of marks, tracks, walls, railway lines that were of significance only if inspected with the eye at beach level. Little was played here, if not happily, at least with absorbed attention, and often as many as 3 of them would play the same game together. 3 were playing here now. Henry was the biggest of them. He was also a distant relative of that other boy whose mulberry-marked face had not been seen since the evening of the Great Fire. But he was not old enough to understand this, and if he had been told that the other boy had gone home in an aircraft, he would have accepted the statement without fuss or disbelief. Henry was a bit of a leader this afternoon, because the other 2 were Percival and Johnny, the smallest boys on the island. Percival was mouse-colored and had not been very attractive even to his mother. Johnny was well-built, with fair hair and a natural belligerence. Just now, he was being obedient because he was interested, and the 3 children kneeling in the sand were at peace. Roger and Maurice came out of the forest. They were relieved from duty at the fire and had come down for a swim. Roger led the way straight through the castles, kicking them over, burying the flowers, scattering the chosen stones. Maurice followed, laughing, and added to the destruction. The 3 little ones paused in their game and looked up. As it happened, the particular marks in which they were interested had not been touched, so they made no protest. Only Percival began to whimper with an eye full of sand, and Maurice hurried away. In his other life, Maurice had received chastisement for filling a younger eye with sand. Now, though there was no parent to let fall a heavy hand, Maurice still felt the unease of wrongdoing. At the back of his mind formed the uncertain outlines of an excuse. He muttered something about a swim and broke into a trot. Roger remained, watching the little ones. He was not noticeably darker than when he had dropped in, but the shock of black hair down his nape and low on his forehead seemed to suit his gloomy face, and made what had seemed at first an unsocial remoteness into something forbidding. Percival finished his whimper and went on playing, for the tears had washed the sand away. Johnny watched him with china blue eyes, then began to fling up sand in a shower, and presently Percival was crying again. When Henry tired of his play and wandered off along the beach, Roger followed him, keeping beneath the palms and drifting casually in the same direction. Henry walked at a distance from the palms and the shade because he was too young to keep himself out of the sun. Down the beach and busied himself at the water's edge. The great Pacific tide was coming in, and every few seconds the relatively still water of the lagoon heaved forward an inch. There were creatures that lived in this last fling of the sea, tiny transparencies that came questing in with the water over the hot, dry sand. With impalpable organs of sense, they examined this new field. Perhaps food had appeared where at the last incursion there had been none. Bird droppings, insects perhaps, anything was strewn detritus of landward life. Like a myriad of tiny teeth in a saw, the transparencies came scavenging over the beach. This was fascinating to Henry. He poked about with a bit of stick. That itself was wave-worn and whitened and a vagrant, and tried to control the motions of the scavengers. He made little runnels that the tide filled and tried to crowd them with creatures. He became absorbed beyond mere happiness as he felt himself exercising control over living things. He talked to them, urging them, ordering them. Driven back by the tide, his footprints became bays in which they were trapped and gave him the illusion of mastery. He squatted on his hands at the water's edge, bowed, with a shock of hair falling over his forehead and past his eyes, and the afternoon sun emptied down the invisible arrows. Roger waited too. At first, he had hidden behind a great palm, but Henry's absorption with the transparencies was so obvious that at last he stood out in full view. He looked along the beach. Percival had gone off, crying, and Johnny was left in triumphant possession of the castles. He sat there, crooning to himself and throwing sand at an imaginary Percival. Beyond him, Roger could see the platform and the glints of spray where Ralph and Simon and Piggy and Maurice were diving in the pool. He listened carefully but could only just hear them. A sudden breeze shook the fringe of palm trees so that the fronds tossed and fluttered. 60 feet above Roger, several nuts, 5 lumps as big as rugby balls, were loosed from their stems. They fell about him with a series of hard thumps, and he was not touched. Roger did not consider his escape, but looked from the nuts to Henry and back again. The subsoil beneath the palm trees was a raised beach, and generations of palms had worked loose in this, the stones that had lain on the sands of another shore. Roger stooped, picked up a stone, aimed, and threw it at Henry. Threw it to miss. The stone, that token of preposterous time, bounced 5 yards to Henry's right and fell in the water. Roger gathered a handful of stones and began to throw them. Yet there was a space round Henry, perhaps 6 yards in diameter, into which he dared not throw. Here, invisible yet strong, was the taboo of the old life. Round the squatting child was the protection of school and policemen and the law. Roger's arm was conditioned by a civilization that knew nothing of him and was unmoving. Henry was surprised by the plopping sounds in the water. He abandoned the noiseless transparencies and pointed at the center of the spreading rings like a setter. The stones fell, and Henry turned obediently, but always too late to see the stones in the air. At last he saw one and laughed, looking for the friend who was teasing him. But Roger had whipped behind the palm again, was leaning against it, breathing quickly, eyelids fluttering. Then Henry lost interest in stones and wandered off. Roger! Jack was standing under a tree about 10 yards away. When Roger opened his eyes, he saw him. A darker shadow crept beneath the swarthiness of his skin, but Jack noticed nothing. He was eager, impatient, beckoning, so that Roger went to him. There was a small pool at the end of the river, dammed back by sand and full of white water lilies and needle-like reeds. Here, salmon were waiting. Jack concealed from himself by the open the 2 large leaves that he carried. One of them continued to play, and the other, providently its tip of chocolate brought down from the fire. Jack explained to Roger as he worked. They don't smell me. They see me. Something pink under the trees. He smeared on the clay. If only I'd some green. He turned a half-concealed face up to Roger and answered the incomprehension of his gaze. Fog hunting, like in the wall, dazzle paint, like things trying to look like something else. He twisted in the urgency of tone, like moths on a tree trunk. Roger understood and nodded gravely. The twins moved toward Jack and began to protest timidly about something. Jack waved them away. Shut up. He rubbed the charcoal stick between the patches and the light on his face. No, you two, come with me. He feared his reflection and disliked it. And now he took up a double handful of lukewarm water and rubbed the mess from his face. Freckles and sandy eyebrows appeared. Roger smiled, unwilling. You don't half look a mess. Jack planned his new face. He made one cheek and one eye socket white. Then he rubbed red over the other half of his face and splashed the black and chocolate from the right ear. He looked at the pool for his reflection, but his breathing troubled the mirror. Seminary, get me a coconut, an empty one. He knelt, holding the shell of water. A rounded patch of sunlight fell on his face, and the brightness appeared in the depths of the water. He looked in astonishment, no longer at himself, but at an awesome stranger. He split the water and leapt to his feet, laughing excitedly. His sinewy body held up a mask that drew their eyes and all them. He began to dance, and his laughter became a bloodthirsty snarling. He capered toward Bill, and the mask was a thing on its own, behind which Jack, liberated from shame and self-consciousness, face of red and white and black swung through the air and jigged toward Bill. Bill started up laughing. Then suddenly he fell silent and blundered away through the bushes. Jack rushed toward the twins. The rest are making a line. Come on. But come on. I'll creep up and stab. The mask compelled them. Ralph climbed out the wading pool and trotted up the beach and sat in the shade beneath the palms. His fair hair was plastered over his eyebrows when he pushed it. Silence floated in the water, and the waves were practicing diving. He was moving about, aimlessly picking up things and discarding them. The rock was so fascinating, covered by the tide, so he was without an interest until the tide went back. Suddenly, seeing Ralph under the palms, he came and sat by him. Picking more of the remainders of a pair of shorts, his fat body was golden brown, and the glasses still flashed when he looked at anything. He was the only boy on the island whose hair never seemed to grow. The rest were shock-headed, but Piggy's hair still lay in wisps over his head as though baldness were his natural state, and this imperfect covering would soon go, like the velvet on a young stag's antlers. I've been thinking, he said, about the clock. We could make a sundial. We could put a stick in the sand and then... The effort to express the mathematical processes involved was too great. He made a few passes instead. And an airplane, and a TV set, said Ralph sourly, and a steam engine. He shook his head. You have to have a lot of mental things for that, he said. And we haven't got any mental. But if we got a stick... Ralph turned and smiled involuntarily. He wasn't bored. His fat, his asthma, and his matter-of-fact ideas were dull. There was always a little pleasure to be got out of pulling his leg, even if one did it by accident. Then he saw the smile and misinterpreted as friendliness. There had grown up tacitly under vacancy opinion that Piggy was an outsider, not only by accent, which did not matter, but by fat and asthma and specs, and a certain disinclination. That made Ralph smile. He rejoiced and pressed his hand. We got some value. Then we should know what the time was. The fact that it could happen be. You said you wanted things done, so as we could be rescued. Oh, shut up. He leapt to his feet and trotted back to the pool just as Maurice did a rapid forward dive. Ralph was glad of a chance to change the subject. He shouted as Maurice came to the surface. Belly flop! Belly flop! Maurice flashed a smile at Ralph and shifted easily into the water. Of all the boys, he was the most at home there. But today, Bert wanted mention of rescue. The useless, foot-laden mention of rescue. Even the green depths of water, the shattered golden sun got no balm. Instead of remaining and playing, he swam with steady strokes under Simon and crawled out of the other side of the pool to lie there, sleek and streaming like a seal. Piggy, always clumsy, stood up and made to stand by him, so that Ralph rolled on his stomach and pretended not to see. The mirages had died away, and gloomily he ran his eye along the top blue line of the horizon. The next moment, he was on his feet and shouting, "Smoke! Smoke!" Simon tried to sit up in the water and got a mouthful. Maurice, who had been standing ready to dive, swayed back on his feet, gave a bolt to the platform, then swerved back to the grass under the palms. There, he started to pull on his tattered shorts, to be ready for anything. He stood, one hand holding back his hair, the other clenched. Simon was climbing out of the water. Piggy was rubbing his glasses on his shorts and squinting at the sea. Maurice got both legs through one leg of his shorts. Of all the boys, only Ralph was still. "I see no smoke," said Piggy incredulously. "I can't see no smoke, Ralph. Where is it?" Ralph said nothing. Now both his hands were clenched over his forehead so that the fair hair was kept out of his eyes. He was leaning forward and already the salt was whitening his body. "Ralph, where's the ship?" Simon stood by, looking from Ralph to the horizon. Maurice's trousers gave way with a sigh, and he abandoned them as a wreck, rushed toward the forest, and then came back again. The smoke was a tight little ball on the horizon and was uncoiling slowly. Beneath the smoke was a dot that might be a funnel. Ralph's face was pale as he spoke to himself. "They'll see our smoke." And he was looking in the right direction now. "Don't look much." He turned around and peered up at the mountain. Ralph continued to watch the ship around him. Color was coming back into his face. Simon stood by him silent.
I know I can't see very much,
said Piggy.
Have we got any smoke?
Ralph moved impatiently, still watching the ship.
There's smoke on the mountain.
Maurice came running and stared out to sea. Both Simon and Piggy were looking up at the mountain. Piggy screwed up his face, but Simon cried out as though he had hurt himself.
Ralph! Ralph!
The quality of his speech twisted Ralph on the sand.
You tell me,
said Piggy anxiously.
is there a signal?
Ralph looked back at the dispersing smoke in the horizon, then up at the mountain.
Ralph, please, is there a signal?
Simon put out his hand timidly to touch it, but Ralph started to run, splashing to the shallow end of the bathing pool, across the hot white sand and under the palms. A moment later, he was back into the complex under roof that was already engulfing the scar. Simon ran after him, then Maurice. Piggy shouted,
Ralph, please, Ralph!
Then he too started to run, stumbling over Maurice's discarded shorts before he was across the terrace. Behind the four boys, the smoke moved gently along the horizon, and on the beach, Henry and Johnny were throwing sand at Percival, who was crying quietly again, and all three were in complete ignorance of the excitement. By the time Ralph had reached the landward end of the scar, he was using precious breath to swear. He did desperate violence to his naked body among the rasping creepers, so that blood was sliding over him. Just where the steep ascent of the mountain began, he stopped. Maurice was only a few yards behind him.
Piggy specs,
shouted Ralph.
If the fire's all out, we'll need them.
He stopped shouting and swayed on his feet. Piggy was only just visible, bumbling up from the beach. Ralph looked at the horizon, then up to the mountain. Was it better to fetch Piggy's glasses, or would the ship have gone? Or, if they climbed on, supposing the fire was all out, and they had to watch Piggy crawling nearer and the ship sinking over the horizon. Balanced on a high peak of need, agonized by indecision, Ralph cried out.
Oh, God! Oh, God!
Simon, struggling with the bushes, caught his breath. His face was twisted. Ralph wandered on, savaging himself, as the wisp of smoke moved on. The fire was dead. They saw that straight away. Saw what they had really known down on the beach from the smoke of home beckoned. The fire was out, smokeless, and dead. The watchers were gone. A pile of unused fuel lay ready. Ralph turned to the sea. The horizon stretched, impersonal once more, and evolved with the faintest trace of smoke. Ralph ran stumbling along the rocks, saved himself on the edge of the pink cliff, and screamed at the ship.
Come back! Come back!
He ran backwards and forwards along the cliff, his face always to the sea, and his voice rose insanely.
Come back! Come back!
Simon and Maurice arrived. Ralph looked at them with unblinking eyes. Simon turned away, smearing the water from his cheeks. Ralph reached inside himself for the word.
Let the fire go out.
He looked down the unfriendly side of the mountain. Piggy arrived, out of breath and whimpering like a little. Ralph clenched his fist and went very red. The intentness of his gaze, the bitterness of his voice, pointed for him. There they are. In position now, far down in the stones that lay near the water's edge. Some of the boys wore black caps, but otherwise they were almost naked. They lifted sticks in the air together whenever they came to a busy patch. They were chanting, something to do with the bundle that the errant twins carried so carefully. Ralph picked out Jack easily, even at that distance, tall, red-haired, and inevitably leading the procession. Simon looked now from Ralph to Jack, as he had looked from Ralph to the horizon, and what he saw seemed to make him afraid. Ralph said nothing more, but waited while the procession came near. The chant was audible, but at that distance, still worthless. Jack watched the twins carrying a great stake on their shoulders. The gutted carcass of a pig swung from the stake, swinging heavily as the twins threw over the uneven ground. The pig's head hung down with gaping neck and seemed to search for something on the ground. At last, the words of the chant floated up to him across the bowl of blackened wood and ashes.
Kill that pig, cut her throat, spill her blood.
Yet, as the words became audible, the procession reached the steepest part of the mountain, and in a minute or two, the chant had died away. Piggy sniffled, and Simon shushed him quickly as though he had spoken too loudly in church. Jack, his face smeared with swift clays, he reached the top first and hailed Ralph excitedly with lifted spear.
Look, we've killed a pig. We stole up on them. We got in a circle.
Voices broke in from the hunters.
We got in a circle. We crept up. The pig squealed.
The twins stood with the pig swimming between them, dropping black gouts on the rock. They seemed to share one wide, static grin. Jack had too many things to tell Ralph at once. Instead, he danced a step or two, then remembered his dignity and stood still, grinning. He noticed blood on his hands and grimaced distastefully, looked for something on which to clean them, then wiped them on his shorts and laughed. Ralph spoke.
You let the fire go out.
Jack checked, vaguely irritated by this irrelevance, but too happy to let it worry him.
We can light the fire again. You should have been with us, Ralph. We had a smashing time. The twins got knocked over. We hit the pig. I fell on top. I cut the pig's throat,
said Jack proudly, and twitched as he said it.
Can I borrow yours, Ralph, to make a nick in the hilt?
The boys chattered and danced. The twins continued to grin.
There was lashings of blood,
said Jack, laughing and shuddering.
You should have seen it. We'll go hunting every day.
Ralph spoke again, hoarsely. He had not moved.
You let the fire go out.
This repetition made Jack nervous. He looked at the twins, and then back at Ralph.
We had to have them in the hunt,
he said,
or there wouldn't have been enough for a ring.
He flushed, conscious of a fault.
The fire's only been out an hour or two. We can light up again.
He noticed Ralph's scarred nakedness and the somber silence of all four of them. He sobbed, charitable in his happiness, to include them in the thing that had happened. His mind was crowded with memories of the knowledge that had come to them when they closed in on the struggling pig, knowledge that they had outwitted a living thing, imposed their will upon it, taken away its life like a long, satisfying drink. He spread his arms wide.
You should have seen the blood.
The hunters were more silent now, but at this they buzzed again. Ralph flung back his hair, one arm pointed at the empty horizon. His voice was loud and savage and struck them into silence.
There was a ship.
Jack, faced at once with too many awful implications, ducked away from them. He laid a hand on the pig and drew his knife. Ralph brought his arm down, fist clenched, and his voice shook.
There was a ship out there. You said you keep the fire going and you let it out.
He took a step toward Jack, turned and faced him.
They might have seen us. We might have gone home.
This was too bitter for Piggy, who forgot his timidity in the agony of his loss. He began to cry out, shrilly.
You and your blood, Jack Merridew. You and your hunting. We might have gone home.
Ralph pushed Piggy to one side.
I was chief, and you were going to do what I said. You talk, but you can't even build huts. Then you go off hunting and let out the fire.
He turned away, silent for a moment. Then his voice came again on a peak of feeling.
There was a ship.
One of the smaller hunters began to wail. The dismal truth was filtering through to everybody. Jack went very red as he hacked and pulled at the pig.
The job was too much. We needed everyone.
Ralph turned.
You could have had everyone when the shelters were finished, but you had to hunt. We needed meat.
Jack stood up as he said this, the bloody knife in his hand. The two boys faced each other. There was the brilliant world of hunting, tactics, fierce exhilaration, skill, and there was the world of longing and baffled common sense. Jack transferred the knife to his left hand and smudged blood over his forehead as he pushed down the plastered hair. Piggy began again.
You didn't ought to have let the fire out. I said you keep the smoke going.
This from Piggy and the wails of agreement from some of the hunters drove Jack into violence. The bolting look came into his blue eyes. He took a step and, able at last to hit someone, stuck his fist into Piggy's stomach. Piggy sat down with a grunt. Jack stood over him. His voice was vicious with humiliation.
You would you? Fatty.
Ralph made a step forward and Jack smacked Piggy's head. Piggy's glasses flew off and tinkled on the rocks. Piggy cried out in terror.
My spades.
He went crouching and feeling over the rocks, but Simon, who got there first, found them for him. Passions beat about Simon on the mountaintop with awful wings.
One side's broken.
Piggy grabbed and put on the glasses. He looked malevolently at Jack.
I got to have them specs. Now I only got one eye. Just you wait.
Jack made a move toward Piggy, who scrambled away till a great rock lay between them. He thrust his head over the top and glared at Jack through his one flashing glass.
Now I only got one eye. Just you wait.
Jack mimicked the whine and scramble.
Just you wait. Yeah.
Piggy and the parody were so funny that the hunters began to laugh. Jack felt encouraged. He went on scrambling, and the laughter rose to a gale of hysteria. Unwillingly, Ralph felt his lips twitch. He was angry with himself for giving up. He muttered,
That was a dirty trick.
Jack broke out of his gyration and stood facing Ralph. His words came in a shout.
All right. All right.
He looked at Piggy, at the hunters, at Ralph.
I'm sorry. About the fire, I mean. There.
He drew himself up.
I apologize.
The buzz from the hunters was one of admiration at this handsome behavior. Clearly, they were of the opinion that Jack had done the decent thing, had put himself in the right by his generous apology, and Ralph, obscurely, in the wrong. They waited for an appropriately decent answer, yet Ralph's throat refused to pass one. He resented, as an addition to Jack's misbehavior, this verbal trick. The fire was dead. The ship was gone. Could they not see? Anger instead of decency passed his throat.
That was a dirty trick.
They were silent on the mountaintop while the opaque look appeared in Jack's eyes and passed away. Ralph's final word was an ingracious mutter. All right, light the fire. With some positive action before them, a little of the tension died. Ralph said no more, did nothing, stood looking down at the ashes round his feet. Jack was loud and active. He gave orders, sang, whistled, threw remarks at the silent Ralph, remarks that did not need an answer, and therefore could not invite a snub. And still, Ralph was silent. No one, not even Jack, would ask him to move, and in the end, they had to build the fire 3 yards away, and in a place not really as convenient. So Ralph asserted his chieftainship, and could not have chosen a better way if he had thought for days. Against his weapon, so indefinable and so effective, Jack was powerless and raged without knowing why. By the time the pile was built, they were on different sides of a high barrier. When they had dealt with the fire, another crisis arose. Jack had no means of lighting it. Then, to his surprise, Ralph went to Piggy and took the glasses from him. Not even Ralph knew how a link between him and Jack had been snapped and fastened elsewhere.
I'll bring him back. I'll got you.
Piggy stood behind him, islanded in a sea of meaningless color, while Ralph knelt and focused the glossy spot. Instantly, the fire was alight. Piggy held out his hands and grabbed the glasses back. Before these fantastically attractive flowers of violet, red, and yellow, unkindness melted away. They became a circle of boys around a campfire, and even Piggy and Ralph were half drawn in. Soon, some of the boys were rushing down the slope for more wood, while Jack hacked the pig. They tried pulling the whole carcass on a stake over the fire, but the stake burned more quickly than the pig roasted. In the end, they skewered bits of meat on branches and held them in the flames. And even then, almost as much boiled was as roasted as meat. Ralph's mouth watered. He meant to refuse meat, but his past diet of fruit and nuts, with an olive crab or fish, gave him too little resistance. He accepted a piece of half-raw meat and nodded like a wolf. Piggy spoke, also dribbling.
Aren't I having none?
Jack had meant to leave him in doubt, as an assertion of power, but Piggy, by advertising his omission, made more cruelty necessary.
You did it, Hunt. No more did Ralph.
Said Piggy wetly.
No Simon.
He amplified.
There isn't more than a half pork of meat in a crab.
Ralph stirred uneasily. Simon, sitting between the twins and Piggy, wiped his mouth and shoved his piece of meat over the rocks to Piggy, who grabbed it. The twins giggled, and Simon lowered his face in shame. Then Jack leapt to his feet, slashed off a great hunk of meat, and flung it down at Simon's feet. Eat, damn you! He glared at Simon. Take it. He spun on his heel, center of a bewildered circle of bullets. I got you, meat. Numberless and inexpressible frustrations combined to make his rage elemental and awe-inspiring.
I painted my face. I stole up. Now you eat, all of you, and I.
Slowly, the silence on the mountaintop deepened until the click of the fire and the soft hiss of roasting meat could be heard clearly. Jack looked round for understanding, but found only respect. Ralph stood among the ashes of the signal fire, his hands full of meat, saying nothing. Then at last, Maurice broke the silence. He changed the subject to the only one that could bring the majority of them together.
Where did you find the pig?
Roger pointed down the unfriendly side.
They were there by the sea.
Jack, recovering, could not bear to have his story told. He broke in quickly.
We spread round. I crept on hands and knees. The spears fell out because they had its barbs on. The pig ran away and it made an awful noise. It turned back and ran into the circle, bleeding.
All the boys were talking at once, relieved and excited.
We closed in.
The first blow had paralyzed its hind quarters, so then the circle could close in and beat. Beat.
I cut the pig's throat.
The twins, still sharing their identical grin, jumped up and ran round each other. The rest joined in, making pig-dying noises and shouting.
One for his snob. Give him a 4-penny one.
Then Maurice pretended to be the pig and ran squealing into the center, and the hunters, circling still, pretended to beat him. As they danced, they sang,
Kill the pig, cut her throat, bash her in.
Ralph watched them, envious and resentful, until they flagged and the chant died away at his feet.
I'm calling an assembly.
One by one, they halted and stood watching him.
With the conch, I'm calling an assembly even if we have to go into the dark. Down on the platform, but I know it. Now.
He turned away and walked off down the mountain.
All right. So obviously for chapter 4, we are starting to see how the tension is starting to build between Jack and Ralph even more than it already was. And again, so we're basically seeing how not only is the tension building between them, but they're starting to get a little bit more aggressive in their actions. Jack specifically with him punching Piggy, then also not only did he punch him in the stomach, but he slapped him so hard he broke his glasses, basically. And so Jack is starting to become a little less like civilized and a little more wild as the story's going. You know, he's painting his face now, so that, which, you know, is he's just trying to be camouflaged so the animals don't spot him as easily. But, you know, symbolically, you could say he's starting to blend in with nature more. And so that way it's just kind of like more symbolic of him like becoming more nature-like and less like civilized, essentially. And so as that's happening, Ralph and Piggy are getting frustrated because, again, obviously they let the ship go, which is the whole point of this chapter, is that the hunters, rather than doing what their job was and keeping the fire going so that, you know, if anyone saw them, like the ship that passed by could see the smoke and come rescue them, they decided, instead of doing what they were supposed to do, they decided to go hunt, which kind of filled an immediate need of theirs. Like, this is like they wanted meat now, but rather than, you know, if they would have done what they were supposed to, they could have been rescued and they wouldn't need a hunt. But again, they basically like shrugged off their like civilized kind of like responsibilities and just did what they like felt like that like primal urge that they had that they needed to do. So like I said, we're going to see how the tension is going to continue to build. Obviously, things are going to get more intense. I know technically one of the villains died in chapter 2, but we are going to see more violence as the book goes on. And so that's just kind of where we're going to leave off. We are going to switch gears here, though, to research. I want to make sure that I let you guys know what to do. I also want to give you guys some time to work on it a little bit today. So let me go ahead and... Okay, so research assignment. So you're going to do this on a Google Doc first. Eventually, you're going to be putting it on your website, but I want you guys just to start here because it's going to be something that you're going to be adding to. So I just figured we'll do it on the dock first. We won't put it on until like that first week in June. But it's going to be due in a couple weeks. But you're going to basically, again, find 3 sources. The sources can be anything from like giving you a history on your topic, offering different perspectives on your topic, or it could be instructional, like how-to kind of like resources too. And when I say different perspective, I'll give you an example. One of my students from yesterday's class, she's wanting to learn how to do a kickflip when she skates. And so I told her, so like one of the things that she could do is maybe look at, multiple videos on how to, multiple instructional videos, because like with a lot of things, there's not one right way to do some things. A lot of times there's like different ways that works better for different people. So obviously, we want to make sure that we do what fits best for you and what you think is easiest. So you might have one source that like whenever I look up recipes, for example, for like a new dish that I want to make, I never just do like one recipe and that's it. I usually look at like 3 or 4 recipes for the same dish, and I'll look, I like what they did here and I like what they did there. And I might take different elements of different recipes that kind of create what I want, And so you guys might do something like that too, depending on what your project is. Again, some of you might be more information gathering, like people who are learning different languages. You can use apps as research also. So it could be videos, it could be app, it could be actual like text online. So there's lots of different resources that you guys can use. So for the 3 resources you find, you will be eventually writing a short paragraph for each one in your own words. So you're not going to just copy and paste what they wrote. If it is text based, you have to kind of put it in your own words. And I'll explain to you guys how to do that. And then you're going to explain how it's going to help you. You're going to explain like what you're learning from it, what parts of it you're going to be using from that source. And then you're going to find an image that goes with the information that you found. Again, all this information is on the research assignment. It's not due for 2 weeks. So what I would say your goal should be for today, before we leave, is to try, I know we only got about 15 minutes, but try to find sources. Try to find 3 sources. Put the links of the sources on your Google Docs. If you have extra time, then work on like your writing or images. But I would say try to find what you're going to be using first and just put it on the Google Doc. And again, so like on Mondays when you guys do your blog, because again, you guys should be working on your projects this week. And I've been starting to grade the blogs. And I'm noticing some people don't have pictures of them. They're just images from online. Make sure that you are doing images of you working on the project or something, at least something that you've created. Like I've had some people it was like a handwritten note that a student of mine did about like the different words that they're learning, like in French. So they wrote down like the words in English and wrote what they mean and tried to like form a sentence with it. So again, it just needs to be some proof that you're trying to like work on your project. Okay, it can't be like a screenshot of something online of something someone else did, because that doesn't really show me that you're working on the project. So make sure that whatever your blog is on Monday that you do that. But if you have extra time on Monday, you could work on the research. If we finish a chapter early, or if you finish a quiz early or an assignment early, this is what you should be working on is your research assignment. So that'll be due 2 weeks again from today on the 28th, which I know it's coming up quick. We're getting towards the end, but we got to make sure that we get this done, because by the time finals week comes, I want your websites are going to be completely done. You'll have 5 blogs on there. You'll have your research page. You'll have, again, examples of you working on the assignment, and you're going to kind of show us what you learned and talk about that in your final presentation on the last week. So do you guys have any questions about either what we read today or the research assignment that's like you're not clear about? Because I don't want you guys to say like I'm good and then 5 minutes from now like say I have no idea what I'm doing. So if you have a question, ask me, tell me, let me know if I said something that doesn't make sense, which does happen, I know. So just tell me. All right, well, if you guys don't have any questions though, I will let you guys work on that. So like I said, try to find your 3 sources today, and that's kind of your goal. And if you have extra time, work on the other parts. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Never fail.